Hello from my home to yours. My name is Andrew Bradshaw, and I am a research associate at SLAC, working mostly on the Rubin LSST camera. Today, I would like to talk to you about my late-night hobby, mapping mass using public sky survey data. Most of this work has been performed over the past 5 years at UC Davis while I was working on my PhD, so I would like to thank my advisor, Tony Tyson, for his support, as well as the friends and colleagues who encouraged me. The mass maps I will show in this talk are the result of some fairly simple processing of catalogs containing tens of millions of galaxy-shaped measurements, which themselves are the results of enormous amounts of work by hundreds of people in the collaborations listed. So I would like to give a big thank you to them for these wonderful data. Any inaccuracies or opinions are likely my own. Please don't hesitate to get in touch with me if you have any questions or comments. Lastly, I'd like to thank the Cosmology from Home organizers for bringing us all together. I hope you enjoy my talk. A link to the slides is available at the bottom, which I recommend using for the best formatting and visualization. If, like me, you enjoy exploring the topography of terrain maps and also wondering about space, then this talk is for you. Experts in the field may find this brief talk to be more qualitative than quantitative, and the second half is basically just looking at maps for fun. In any case, feel free to skip to the good parts or just look at the slides at your own pace and avoid this video altogether. Additionally, my script is typed into the notes of each slide, so you don't have to listen to me stumble through it either. The outline of the talk is as follows. First, I will discuss some background and my motivation for making aperture mass maps with weak lensing catalogs, including filter shapes, E modes and B modes, and detection of clusters in the resultant maps. Then I will talk about how to approximate large-scale structure with a collection of lenses. I will show the results of applying this approximation method to ray-traced in-body simulations and real data, and discuss the resultant shear correlation functions and distributions of map pixel values. Finally, I will present some of the mass maps I've made with several weak lensing sky surveys, which vary in width, depth, filter scale, and measurement method. In particular, I will look at the overlap between these surveys, of which there's quite a bit, in order to understand what features of the maps are due to the method of observation or measurement. But mostly, this is just an excuse to look at some cool maps, so I hope you enjoy them. The basic idea behind mass mapping is that gravity bends the path of light. On cosmological scales, this means that light traveling to us from distant galaxies gets pulled this way or that for billions of years, depending on the average density of mass around it. When we look at this collected light from distant galaxies in survey images, they often appear slightly distorted, tangentially stretched around massive clusters, and slightly radially aligned around voids. These tangential and radial alignments trace the mass along a line of sight and correspond to the so-called E modes in aperture mass maps. The figure on the right is an example of the connection between these E modes and the large-scale structure in a 10 by 10 degree patch of sky, about the size of your fist at arm's length, taken from a large-scale structure simulation made by the Buzzard collaboration to model the dark energy survey. In this figure, the colored pixels represent the sum of mass along a line of sight, where the color scale from blue to red goes from around 100 trillion to a few quadrillion solar masses. The overlaid grayscale contours are the E-mode aperture mass map, which comes from filtering the background galaxy-shaped catalog, represented here by small whiskers. As you can see, the tangential E modes in the whiskers are tightly correlated with the foreground mass along the line of sight, implying E modes can be used to detect clusters of mass. Of course, outside of a simulation, you can't see the pixels because we don't yet know the full 3D structure of the cosmic web, but you might be able to infer it from the E modes in the shapes of background galaxies. In this talk, I will show my efforts toward using E-mode mass maps to infer and visualize the large-scale structure around us. As an aside, these maps can also be used to compare cosmological models, but I won't be talking about lambda CDM today, other than testing the assumption that astrophysical sources of B modes, the evil twin of E modes, are zero. On slide 4, I attempt to quantify the process of aperture mass mapping, where I show here the only equations needed to translate the shear catalog into pixels of the mass map. The basic idea is to use a filter Q to radially weight the tangential shear around each point in the map according to the chosen filter shape. In my maps, I choose to use an NFW filter shape with variable concentration and scale parameters that approximately matches the expected radial shear profile of a typical cluster at a given distance. In principle, this provides an optimal detection method for clusters of mass formed under gravity. Other benefits of using aperture mass map statistics is that it avoids the so-called mass sheet degeneracy by instead measuring mass contrast. In principle, this means that structures detected in the map will be limited by the choice of filter scale. In most of my maps, this contrast will be represented by pixel values, which are a signal-to-noise ratio, S, which represents the sum of tangential, or in the case of B modes, swirly, shear patterns multiplied by the radial weight and then divided by the noise, which comes from mostly random source galaxy orientations. Another benefit of aperture mass maps is that they help mitigate a common problem in shear measurement called multiplicative shear bias that often requires careful calibration. Additional benefits of using the aperture mass statistic is that it is simple to compute, allowing rapid map making at different scales and tomographic redshifts. Finally, we can also think of the maps as a spatial analog of the shear power spectrum. I will show later how clusters detected in mass maps can also approximate shear power spectra. But first, I will talk about how to detect and model them. To detect nearby structures, you will need to first have a deep catalog of background galaxies that have had their shear and redshift carefully measured. Once this painstaking observational challenge is taken care of, in this case by the hard work of hundreds of people collaborating over many years, you can then use the resultant shear catalog along with the math on the previous slide to make a mass map like the one on the right, which is a finer scaled map of the same piece of the simulation shown on slide 3, except this time the pixel values are measured E-mode signal-to-noise ratios ranging from -1 to 5 from black to white. Known clusters from the simulation are marked as circles, which can be seen by eye to overlap with peaks in the E-mode map. However, algorithmically speaking, segmenting this map of fuzzy peaks in a noisy, structured background is an ongoing research topic. I use a source extractor type algorithm with variable thresholding and deblending parameters to detect and separate peaks shown in the map marked with squares, which spatially correspond to the structures seen in the known clustered catalog. Once they are located along the line of sight and right ascension and declination, you can then perform a similar detection in right ascension versus redshift or declination versus redshift to approximate each cluster with a chosen mass, concentration, and redshift. This catalog of clusters can then be compared to the full field of lenses that is distorting the background galaxies. On slide 6, I illustrate this process with a smaller field about a degree on a side, which contains around 100 clusters with masses greater than 10 to the 13 suns. Here, I compare the results of ray tracing the full mass distribution of an in-body simulation on the left to my approximation of the field using mass maps on the right. Most of the large-scale structure in the E-mode maps is captured by this method. However, some small-scale structure is of course lost. Intriguingly, the B-mode maps on the bottom row also show good correspondence, though B-modes are not produced by isolated lenses on a uniform source distribution. They are known to be produced by realistically inhomogeneous and clustered 3D source distributions of galaxies, as well as by observational shortcomings such as edges and apodization in the mapping algorithms. Understanding and modeling these known sources of B-modes, given a field of lenses and a distribution of background galaxies, is of particular interest to me. Moving on to slide 7, I show how the mass mapping approximation to large-scale structure works in a perfect world, where you could exactly estimate the mass and redshift and concentration of each NFW cluster along the line of sight. These two figures show you the two components of shear that can be measured, which when combined, tell you the ellipticity and orientation of background galaxies. On the x-axis is the shear computed from ray tracing the entire evolving mass distribution of the in-body simulation from a given source galaxy to the observer. On the y-axis is simply a sum of the approximated shears along the line of sight. The two are in good agreement, illustrating the potential power of such a rough approximation when applied to real data. On slide 8, I show the result of mass mapping a real field of multiple lenses in the constellation Lynx that was imaged by the good old Suprime-cam on the Subaru 8-meter telescope for around 5 hours, split between 5 bands. I processed the raw data independently, calibrating the colors together for phot-z estimates using BPZ and shape estimates using James G's award-winning S-fit algorithm on the 3 lensing quality bands R, I, and Z. This data reaches the depth of about 27th magnitude on this small patch of sky, which is similar to the depth that will be achieved by the Rubin LSST survey across the full southern sky after 10 years. The mass map contours overlaid on the RGB image range from -3 to +8, blue to red, and are generated using the same mapping algorithm used on simulations. Of particular note in this field is the Lynx North structure of orange galaxies in the middle top left, which has an estimated mass of 5 × 10 to the 14th solar masses at a redshift of about a half. On slide 9, I show the approximation method applied to this Lynx North field. The figure on the right shows the observed mass map in blue to red contours and the approximated map in blue to red filled colors. The approximation appears to work well for this field, essentially compressing the information in the mass map, which was made from the filtered shear of tens of thousands of galaxies, down to a few dozen detected clusters shown as black squares. However, will this approximation work for the shear correlations? Will it work on all scales? Slide 10 seems to indicate that the mass mapping method works surprisingly well in reproducing the shear correlations. On the left, approximating the few dozen detected clusters from the mass map of the Lynx field as NFW clusters with estimated redshifts, masses, and concentrations actually reproduces the correlated E-mode shear field on nearly all scales, shown as blue curves in all subplots. On the right is the same approximation applied to the observations of the simulated field, which is of course a completely different field of lenses. Of note is that in both simulations and observations, this shear approximation works in a variety of widely used filters, which notably don't include the NFW filter I used for detection. Also shown in the reddish curves are the B-mode correlations, which measure the swirl and handedness of the shear field. These are also generally reproduced in shape and scale by the approximation, indicating that using the approximated lens field from the E-mode map helps predict the observationally induced B-modes. On slide 11, I show the distribution of aperture mass map pixels. On the left, the distribution of E and B mode map pixel values for the Lynx field are shown, and on the right is the piece of the in-body simulation. The observed and ray-traced map values are shown as filled in gray, and in red, green, and blue are 3 various source galaxy distributions used as an input to the approximation. In the case of the simulation, the effect on B modes is generally overestimated in the simulations, while the on-sky data shows an underestimation given by the approximation. This could be due to a few interesting sources of B modes or many mundane sources. Further investigation is ongoing, but usually the best way to solve these sorts of issues is to take more data. So let's look at the mass maps made from the gigantic shape catalogs generously made by public surveys of the sky. On the right is my spaghetti plot for the full sky squished into a little box. Apologies for the mess. It shows the locations of 5 deep surveys of the sky, DLS, CFHT lens, KIDS, DES, and HSC, as filled colored regions, as well as the locations of Abell clusters with richness greater than 1, and a catalog of nearby filaments observed by the SDSS just for fun. As you can see, there is some interesting overlap in the fields, in particular between the KIDS field in red and the HSC fields in purple, as well as a small region of the Dark Energy Survey Year 1 catalog and the DLS field F3. I will highlight these overlapping fields in my overview of the mass maps in the next slides. By the way, I will move quickly through these mass maps, only describing the properties of the fields and map-making parameters. Feel free to disregard my narration and just look at the slides at your own pace. On slide 13, I show the mass maps produced using the public shape catalogs from nearly 20-year-old observations in the CFHT lens and DLS surveys. Both mass maps are scaled from a signal to noise of -1 to 5, black to white. CFHT uses an NFW filter scale of 1 degree, and DLS uses a filter scale of 1/4 of a degree on source galaxies with redshift greater than 1/2. Rich Abell clusters, when present in the field, are marked with white or black circles. On slide 14, I show the background galaxy distribution of an 80 by 20 degree patch of the Dark Energy Survey Year 1 catalog, containing tens of millions of galaxies at redshifts greater than 0.3. Holes in the catalog due to bright foreground stars can be seen, as well as a modeled distribution of source galaxies due to natural gravitational clustering. These are the galaxies which I used in the making of the map on the following slides, which have their positions and scales matched so that you can flick back and forth between various visualizations. On slide 15, I show the aperture mass map made from filtering the shape catalog of source objects with a 1 degree NFW filter. Signal to noise is shown as contours ranging from -2 to 4, blue to red. Overlaid on the contours are the positions of Abell catalog members shown as black circles. In green circles, a modern X-ray selected cluster catalog. Good correspondence between the obvious peaks in the mass map and the verified clusters can be seen. On slide 16, I show the NFW aperture mass maps of the same field, but filtered using an increasing outer radius scale from about 1/4 of a degree to a few degrees. On slide 17, I compare the small patch of DES that overlaps with the DLS. And comparing apples to apples using the same matched galaxies which are observed and measured through different telescopes and algorithms, the mass maps for both the E modes and B modes generally agree. This appears to indicate that observational and measurement systematics, such as optics and shear estimation, are subdominant to the B modes intrinsic to the field, and those which are due to the mass mapping algorithm. On slide 18, I show the E-mode maps from the publicly available shape catalogs of the KIDS survey. On slide 19, I show the B modes for the same KIDS fields. Moving on to slide 20, where I show the mass maps from the very deep Subaru Suprime-cam, ranging in signal to noise from -2 to 8 and blue to red. Several peaks even exceed signal to noise ratio of 10, with measurably correlated tangential shear out to 1/2 a degree or more. On slide 21, I compare the G9 field as seen by HSC and KIDS. Both maps are shown with color scales ranging from -1 to 5 signal to noise, and are made using the same 1/2 a degree NFW filter applied to source galaxies with redshifts greater than 1/2. It is clear that the greater depth of HSC enables both finer resolution and higher signal to noise, but the two maps clearly see the same foreground structures. On slide 22, I show a visualization of the foreground structure by comparing the clustering of nearby galaxies to the mass maps generated from background galaxy shapes. On slide 23 and 24, I show another comparison, this time between my NFW filtered mass maps and maps of convergence produced by a similar but non-optimal filter of a shape catalog which was produced via a different shear measurement pipeline run on the same data. Slide 24 shows the same comparison as slide 23, but for the wide 12H field. Slide 25 shows the E-mode mass maps of the 6 HSC survey fields, but varying the minimum source galaxy redshift in steps from 0.9 to 0.5 to 0.1. To summarize, aperture mass maps made via simple optimal filtering of public shape catalogs are both a powerful method to detect clusters and to generate beautiful maps of the cosmic web. Detecting and modeling the clusters found in these maps will help to disentangle that web, enabling a deeper understanding of the structure around us and its distorting influence on our view of the distant universe. Thanks for tuning in. I hope to meet you in person one day.